Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to episode 3 of the Rooted in Riv podcast. I am your host, Eric Pacheco. Let's get started with this past week in ASU football. Last week, on Saturday, November 15th, Arizona State took down West Virginia 25-23. In that game, junior defensive back Keith Abney II shined as he recorded 4 tackles, 2 pass breakups, a forced fumble, and the game-clinching interception to help propel the Sun Devils to victory. To read more about Abney and ASU's victory over West Virginia, check out my story at thestatepress.com. In some other news, read about my story on ASU's football injuries all season long and how it's tested their team's resilience. And also in a collab piece with one of my colleagues, Niall Rosenberg, where we address ASU football special teams issue and new special teams coordinator Jack Nudo. And lastly, the Jeff Sims experience has captivated everyone in the Valley. Read my profile on him from this past week, where I dive into his resilience and his leadership, being a 6th-year senior and now potentially leading ASU back to the Big 12 championship after all hope seemed lost after Sam Levin went out for the season, and how Jeff Sims may be playing himself into an NFL contract. With that being said, this is episode 3 of Rooted in Riv podcast. Let's dive right into it. Pleased to be joined now by my guest from SoCal News Group, sports reporter based in Riverside, and someone I'm very glad to be able to call a mentor, Dennis Pope.
Eric, thanks for having me on your show, man. Appreciate it. How are you today?
I'm doing good. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. Yeah, it's a good Friday, right? Thanks for having me.
Yep, awesome. This past week, another season of RCC football wrapped up, with the loss in the bowl game to Fullerton, finishing out the season 7-4. It was a big season of change for RCC, obviously with Kevin Kraft coming in his first year as head coach. Definitely a rather disappointing year, definitely from the standards that have been set over the past decade by Kevin Kraft's father, Tom Kraft. Just overall, what was your take and, your takeaway from this season?
The big word at the beginning of the season was decorum, right? Coach Kevin was trying to bring or maintain a level of behavior decorum, right, amongst the group. There had seemed at the end of last season to be a fall off, especially after the final whistle against Mount Sac.
Right.
And, the players' behavior that night wasn't, befitting the previous decade of, Tom Kraft's career at RCC. And so I think in order to bounce back, everybody saw what happened. Everybody was looking for a different mindset from the players. And I think, that was a difficult task with this group because there were still players, holdovers from last year that were part of this group. And that made things difficult, right? Because a lot of those attitudes persist. And I think a lot of those attitudes continued throughout the season to a certain extent. And so that word before week 1 was at play. At week 4, it was at play. And at the end of the season, it was still at play when the team was getting penalties for doing, stupid stuff, frankly, on the field, right? Stuff after the whistle, right? That kind of stuff. So whether or not you find that, and that's a consistent thing at the junior college level, is perhaps blame partly on cultural, like you find those types of players at the junior college level, but also RCC has been better than that, right, over the last decade. So there's a standard that's been applied that Kevin was trying to maintain by perhaps maintaining a level of decorum, right, amongst the players that suited the class, right, the classiness of the program. Maybe that was successful. Maybe it wasn't. I think, playing in a bowl game despite the down year should be considered a success. Playing in the rain has never been a Riverside football strong suit. And so I'm not necessarily surprised by the result. But, the close losses, right, to really good teams, I think showed the high standard still of the talent on this team.
Right.
It's about bringing it all together. And I think a lot of that has to do with the quarterback situation, frankly, right? There's no one defined leader, right? There's no one to really follow. And so the back and forth at the quarterback position was kind of a microcosm of the entire team, I think, this year. Good guys, right? Both really good guys, but neither one of them clearly the leader.
And how much of that, kind of decorum struggles do you think, Kevin Kraft coming on late? I mean, he was announced mid-June, I believe, officially as head coach. How much of that, kind of plays into those issues that they had? The team, these players, recruits, or whoever, returners, don't know who the guy is going to be until 2 months before season starts.
Yeah, unfortunately, that for me falls on the players, right? I think each and every one of them has a personal responsibility to uphold the standards of the program, right, on the field and off the field. How much can a coach influence that, I think, is really the question here. It's difficult because this is Coach Kraft's first shot at being a head coach of this team, right? And so first and foremost, he's trying to get them to fall in line, basically, right? And understand the leadership structure of the organization again, and whether or not they were willing to respect that. And I think he found the players ultimately who would moving forward. And this should not be an issue, right, in recruiting classes going forward. There shouldn't be now very few players on this roster now who were on this team when they played against Mount Sac now 2 years ago.
Right. And you kind of touched on it already, the tale of two quarterbacks throughout the entire year. Kevin Kraft didn't want to name a quarterback prior to preseason. First game out, Brian Wilson got the start. And then it was they were both playing like equal amounts in those first couple of games. But obviously, I believe second game of the season was that Golden West game, or it might have been the third. But they kind of went with Jared there for a second, and he was kind of the guy, it looked like. I believe he had turnover struggles. I think there was a game where he threw 4 interceptions, and they went back to Brian, and then it seemed like Brian was the guy for kind of the remainder of the season, with Jared still kind of getting some action in there. I mean, you kind of already touched on it, but maybe to further expand kind of the difficulties with, having both guys out there and just not being able to have one continuous guy under center.
So you think about RCC the last 10 years and you think about quarterbacks, right? And the list is long and there's an expectation, right? And I think we have two very different quarterbacks this year in both of them. They're just diametrically opposite. Jared is a tall quarterback, stands in the pocket, throws a great deep ball. I mean, it's a beautiful thing, really. Just is sometimes super late with his reads. Okay. And that's what you find at quarterbacks at the junior college level. The pace of the game takes a lot of time to catch up with. Brian Wilson, way more mobile, right? Way more able to do things outside the pocket, and make gains for the team with his legs. So you take the good and the bad with that, right? With both of those things. And so Jared found himself in a position where he threw 4 interceptions in that game. And so they had to make a change.
Right.
They bring in Brian. He leads them to a win and then leads them to like 4 in a row at that point, back into bowl contention. So they're riding the hot hand very much at that point. Brian's winning, the team's winning, right? You're staying with the winning guy. But we saw in the bowl game, it was difficult for Brian, right? So they went to Jared, and Jared actually had a little bit better statistical game than Brian did in the bowl game. So it's still uncertainty to the very end about who the quarterback is, and that kind of bleeds into the confidence of the team. Because again, a very confident quarterback has led this team the last decade, and there have been 8 of them, and they've all gone on to D1. Jake Retzlaff, of course, was a Heisman Trophy candidate for a little while at BYU. Stone Smart now plays in the NFL as a tight end. The list is long, right? With RCC quarterbacks now at this point under Tom Kraft. And so with Kevin Kraft, still an expectation to have a really solid leading guy, right, at the quarterback position, and that just never really materialized this year. I like both of them. I think both of them have the ability to put it together and play on Saturdays going forward. They have to find the right situation.
Mm-hmm. And, how much of the, I guess, dynamic of Tom Kraft coming back and still being an assistant coach, do you think that made it more difficult for Kevin to really, kind of talk about what we've been talking about, establish that this is my team moving forward, and with obviously Tom still being there and being around and remaining on the coaching staff?
I only saw Tom, and mind you, I only showed up on Saturdays for games.
Right.
I only saw him on the sidelines, and then he was out of there, right? Even faster than he would be when he was head coach previously. He would linger for a minute because he knew he had a little bit of media responsibility. Now he knows he has zero media responsibility, and so he's out of there just as soon as the final whistle blows. I can't imagine he's putting in extra hours anymore, around. So maybe he's, taking steps to remove himself from the program while also, Kevin spends those hours there. But it's hard to say, right, how much influence, right, Tom has at this point. If he completely steps away and is just like an advisory teacher role, I mean, that's a massive benefit to those quarterbacks in any program that he works in. I think they'll begin to see, again, as the seasons progress here, 2026, 2027, Kevin's program. And if Tom's still around in an advisory role, he's teaching these quarterbacks the finer points about this. Again, the transition year, difficult, right? Because Tom is still a legend. He's a Riverside Hall of Famer, Sport Hall of Famer. He has a legend aura about him. And that's hard to, I think, remove from the equation yet, but I'm pretty sure as we see seasons progress, off seasons progress, Tom won't be as visible a part of the program.
Mm-hmm. And the overall sporting department at RCC, Jen Spalding took over this past August in her first, starting her first year as AD at RCC. It's been kind of a revolving door of athletic directors at RCC the past couple of years. What have you made of her, sort of start and her impact thus far at RCC?
Way more accessible than previous athletic directors at RCC. She is, of course, an alum, was an All-American in water polo. She's a goalie in water polo at RCC during the era in which I was working at Viewpoints back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And previously her last name was Moon before she was married and changed her name to Spalding. But very interesting connection to the community. I think she's really invested. She's a Riverside native. She went to high school at Arlington here in town. And so she grew up in Riverside, believes in the power of Riverside and the power of the college to transform lives and give athletes a second chance, a third chance, or even a first chance, to prove themselves. And I think ultimately she's going to be great for the sporting culture at RCC. She's already changed the facial board of the scoreboard. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's fantastic looking now. It was so old and kind of decrepit before, and she really changed how that looks. And that's just one instance of the improvements that she's made. In talking to her, she wants to make not just that kind of change, but visible changes that have impact, right? So many things have been neglected for so long around campus that she, is picking up on these things and having conversations with people and making these changes that she can make very quickly with the budget that she has, to have some change positive made for these programs. And I think it's having an impact in the way people are seeing her. I'm hopeful that she's able to, do things that promote wellness within the program going forward, and have the right, people, coaches, continue to have those same people who are really, really good for the college in place going forward, and create an environment where they're, feeling like their services and their their abilities are wanted and useful, because under previous administrations that had become not really the case. I'm having kind of to mince my words there a little bit, but I think you see, she's a more open kind of environment person, and I think that's going to lead to more success overall.
Right, and then obviously today, Friday night, we're right in the middle of CIF football playoffs. Can you kind of dive us into, the outlook of games and matchups that we have going on this week? I'm sure there's a couple of Riverside schools still in play, a couple of overall just Inland Empire schools, still fighting for a chance to hoist that
Yeah.
CIF plaque.
Yeah, you want to shift gears. Okay. High school football. It starts at the top, right? Centennial is hosting Modern Day tonight at Centennial. That is going to be chaos. Centennial is not, their football field is not, or their capacity is not fit for that magnitude of game. And so the traffic is going to be a nightmare on Rimpaw tonight. I'm glad I'm not covering that game,
Right.
thankfully. Two Riverside schools still involved, Ramona, right, which has had a lot of success the last couple of years. They're back in the semifinals. They're on the road. Believe they're on the road. And then Hillcrest is playing in its first semifinal, and that game is at Norte Vista. So that game is in Riverside tonight. Another game I won't be at. I'm traveling out to Hemet, where Hemet Tockwitz High School is hosting Santa Monica. That's Riverside County still, technically still, in the coverage area, but it's way out there. So I'm in for a drive. The Titans are looking to get to 10 wins for the first time in program history. So looking forward to that this evening. Just the semifinals. So, we'll see who makes it. Ramona trying to make it to another final. Hillcrest certainly trying to make it to its first final. Centennial, can they beat Modern Day again in the same season? So difficult to beat the same team twice, let alone Modern Day. That just feels like an enormous task for them. But I saw Centennial 3 times this year, just as good as any time I've seen them at any point, just about, with any players. They have a Catalano at quarterback who's like a redo of his brother, a little bit taller though, a little bit better. His brother will have you saying that. But and then their running back class is just as talented as always. They got some kids who can really bruise it. They've got some guys who can really run it. It's just like a well-oiled machine over there with that offense. And defensively, they get stops. I think that's important, right? They find a way to get some guys who can grind and get some defensive stops. They always have really, really talented defensive backs and like 1 or 2 either linebackers or defensive linemen who were D1 guys. And ultimately, 75% of Centennial's roster ends up playing college football. And so you're up against, these are it's like a state championship game tonight, at Centennial. So very exciting.
Yeah, a lot of exciting matchups going on for sure. And, kind of branching out to the other universities in Riverside, Cal Baptist and UCR, what's kind of going on with them? Can you kind of dive into those?
Yeah, CBU and UC Riverside played men's basketball on Tuesday night in the very final crosstown showdown before they become conference mates in the Big West next year, right? So I think that's the biggest thing happening right now in college sports in Riverside is that CBU is joining the Big West starting with the 26-27 season. And so now they'll play in every sport twice a year, home and away. And it'll be an opportunity for Riverside to elevate, I think, its sporting culture. There's a lot of upside, right, to both of those fan bases, being able to travel right into town for away matches, right, and build that culture. I think that's important to sports here in Riverside, as of course we don't have a pro team in town, and so anything to elevate and do more for fans here in town I think is going to be great. Can't wait for some of those soccer matches. That rivalry is going to be intense for both the men's and the women's going forward. And then there's the aspect of potentially there being like a pro soccer team in town. I know I mentioned there's no pro sports in town, but the news in the last couple of months has been that United Soccer League, or USL, is working with a group here in town to bring a team and build a facility here in town. So if there's a soccer stadium here in town, imagine the CBU versus UC Riverside matches being played there with 5,000 fans, raising the soccer culture here in town as well. So I'm excited for that. But baseball, it's going to be great, right? Those are two really, really good mid-major baseball programs. Same with softball. Volleyball has been resurgent under Brandon Higa at UC Riverside. So, good things are happening there. We like that Michelle Almazan at UC Riverside is a person who is from inside the program at UC Riverside and taking over as athletic director there. So she understands, right, the culture, and I think will do good things for the Highlanders overall. And Gus Arginal was the best possible choice for their new basketball coach. He brings an energy and a ability to attract talent that they had previously, but was everybody was fearful about how they were going to replace that energy that Mike Magpayo had. I think they brought in the perfect guy for that. So there's a lot to be said about what UC Riverside is doing right now, even though they lost by 23 points on Tuesday night to CBU. CBU has one of the best point guards in the country, in Dominique Daniels Jr. He went off for 25 points and really gave them an early lead, CBU, that they were able to hold on to. But this is Gus Arginal's first recruiting class, basically. So give them a chance to get going. And I think they're going to be really competitive, especially seeing, right, CBU now twice a year. There's a lot, man. There's a lot going on, and that's just really the tip of the iceberg. There's so many colleges and universities here in the greater Inland Empire area. That those are just the D1s. There's 3 D2s. There's 4 D3s. There's 4 JUCOs. Right, so the ability and the capability for young athletes to compete at the next level is really abundant around here, and I'm happy to try and bring some of that to the readers of the Press Enterprise doing what I do.
Absolutely. I mean, always exciting to have crosstown showdown mean a little bit more with interconference play. Switching gears again here to the Riverside Sport Hall of Fame. I got the opportunity to cover that event this past May for the induction of Tom Kraft, a very great event. I was very excited to be a part of that. We're getting prepared for, I don't know if it's already been fully announced yet, the incoming class of 2026. Yep. Can you kind of dive into, who we will see don the red jacket this upcoming year and kind of maybe the impact that they've had on Riverside sports?
Yeah. Do you have the list of names? Otherwise, I'm going to have to pull out my list here.
I do not have the list of names.
Okay. Sorry. Let me grab it here. Let me get my notes field on my phone. I don't want to miss anybody is my thing, right? So
right. Absolutely.
All right. So the Hall of Fame class this year is Rick Croy, who's the current CBU men's basketball coach, Gwen Ritzow, who is a Riverside Poly multi-sport legend, Derek Johnson, who led Riverside's Notre Dame High School to a CIF championship, but is also a former NFL player, Ryan Knight, former NFL player from Rubidoux High School. And this year will be the first year that we institute a legacy candidate. That person is Bill Muma, who began coaching, if you believe it, at Riverside Poly when it was that building there, that the A.G. Paul quadrangle, right there on Magnolia. That's the original Riverside Poly High School. He was coaching basketball and multi-sports there, track and field there, beginning in the late 1920s. And so he coached through the 1950s, track and field and other sports for both Riverside Poly and Riverside City College. And he had been sort of overlooked in these previous Hall of Fame classes going back to the late 90s when the Hall of Fame was first instituted. And so the Hall of Fame wanted to begin a process to bring back, a legacy, a legends category to the group, right? So we had a list of candidates. I'm now on the nomination committee of the Riverside Sport Hall of Fame. And so, we thought Bill's name would be the best name to go forward. And he'll be inducted here, and his family, obviously Bill's long since passed away, but he still has family in town, and so they'll be representing him on the induction ceremony in May back at CBU's Fowler Event Center. We also have a Wall of Fame, right, distinction class that's separate from the Hall of Fame. These are names that they get their name actually put up on the wall there at the site there on 14th and it's Market Magnolia. That's where it becomes Market.
Right.
And some of those names include Kevin Watson, the boys soccer coach at Arlington High School. He's also a Arlington High School graduate, a CBU alum, was captain of CBU's men's soccer team, and of course led Arlington to the 2019, I believe, CIF championship. So his name is being put up on the wall of distinction, and as is former Press Enterprise sports editor David Zink. Notre Dame graduate, was a place kicker and soccer player at Notre Dame, and became a sports writer for the Press Enterprise at a very early age, and then eventually became the first ever person, a Riverside native, to become sports editor of the Press Enterprise. So he's retired now a couple of years, but he certainly deserves his place among the other media members there. And so I'm very fortunate to have put forth his name and had the board recognize him this year as well. So yeah, that's just among the many names on the wall of distinction this year, but it should be a really good class. And of course, I keep forgetting Lucas Duda, right? Lucas Duda, right? Former Riverside Arlington graduate, former Riverside Arlington baseball player, former Major League Baseball player with, among many teams, the New York Mets. And so he's agreed to be the primary guest of honor, primary Hall of Fame inductee this year. His name was put forth last year, and he was actually inducted last year, but he was unavailable. He made plans to come this year, so we're inducting him this year. But yeah, I keep forgetting his name because he's already been inducted. Like his name's already there, but he will be here. He will be the guest of honor, primary notes or speech giver for the Hall of Fame. So yeah, a really cool event. Looking forward to that. That like the first Monday in May.
Right. Yeah. I mean, without maybe, giving away the secrets of the Riverside Sport Hall of Fame, what's kind of this process like of, nomination, inductee, voting and all that stuff, because I know one of the things that kind of stuck out to me was, current like active people who are coaching can still be inducted. Usually when you think of Hall of Fame, like in the professional world, it's, a couple years after they're retired and all that kind of deal. So can you kind of dive into that whole dynamic?
Yeah, that's a little bit of the conflict that the board has currently is, those standards that are typical of Hall of Fames. How much do we adhere to that? How much do we want to honor current success, right? So at least in the last 2 years, I know that there's been a significant push to get in the older generation because of what happened during COVID, and honor a lot of that generation. And so we did that the last 2 years. There's a very open process, though, for nominations, right? We take nominations from all over. We accept email nominations from the community, right? And we do the research, right? Is this person, first, are they, have they achieved, right, something to make them notable and worthy of the Hall of Fame or the Wall of Distinction first? Because clearly those members that are already there, that sets the standard. And so does that meet, exceed, or is there an argument to be made for a new standard because of this person, right? So we go through that process, and that's again, part of the open process. We make a case-by-case determination based on nominations, and a lot of nominations we've seen before, and there's nominations that continue to be put up every year. Right, there's recurring nominations that I've seen now as a member of this board now the last 3 years, and so there's still that process for people who don't meet the vote. And we do typically the vote is, and this honestly has changed, right? The policies around the vote have changed because of the number of nominations the last few years, because of the things that happened, to COVID, during COVID. So we changed the nominations and the selection process a little bit to honor more people, honestly. We're trying to be more selective, right? We've created a criteria committee, right, to make some policy amendments or propose some policy amendments to create some parameters around, what it means to be a Hall of Famer based upon previous classes, based upon, who's currently in the Hall of Fame. We want there to be a certain standard, but we don't want to be so exclusive, right, that the community doesn't feel like they have involvement. So it's a fine line, honestly, right? It's a very human project, right? And we're playing gatekeepers, honestly, with people's legacies in a lot of ways, and we don't take that lightly. So, we are in the process as a board of kind of reconstructing our committees and how we do things. And one of those things is the criteria committee. Again, I'm on the nomination committee. And so we do have things in process right now to further and better define, right, what it means to be a Riverside Sport Hall of Famer.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I mean, it's a great ceremony, a great event, a great thing for the community. To round things out here, finishing up, I had James Williams on as my last guest on the podcast, and to finish things up with him, wanted to kind of dive into maybe your journey in journalism a little bit, maybe some advice that you've received along the way that has really stuck out with you, some mentors, just overall your thoughts for someone like me who's, entering the space or, trying to get their feet under them, what kind of message would you like to send, I guess?
Sure. Take initiative, right? Is my probably number one piece of advice that I've received from an editor. But that's once you're inside the business already, right? Mm-hmm. That's once you've already kind of gotten into a space where you're working for a media outlet, a publication of some kind. Take initiative on new projects, on ideas, right? If you have an idea, you think it's a good one, let's bring it to the table, right? Ideas are like gold in the media business. So, secondly, read as much as you possibly can. Read newspapers, read magazines, right? Just read as much as you can. Become a fan of reading, fall in love with reading, and do it as much as you can so that you become a better writer. Ultimately, we're looking to become writers, editors. We have to be professionals of the written word, right? And there's no better way to do that than starting that process by reading as much as you can. So that's my 2 bits of advice. Now, as far as my journey goes, I very much wanted to be part of something like media in high school, right? I read the sports page every day. I thought, isn't it amazing that these people get paid to write about sports, right? And this is in a time before really like the argument-based ESPN became a thing. This is still when, Sports Center was 4 episodes in the morning and it was just strictly news, and I don't want to sound like an old man, but it's very much a journalism vibe. A newspaper vibe with sports media still at that point. And so that's what my foundation is on, very AP style, doing things that are news based for publication, for print, right? So I'm a sports writer, and at this point I'm a little old school. I just turned 46, so I'm a generation older than you are at this point. And I love it. Like, I love being able to provide my experience. I'm still doing it for the kids at Viewpoints, right? I was just down there this last week, and I really like that. I like being able to be the guy who works at the Press Enterprise, who used to be editor at Viewpoints, right? And have those conversations with those student journalists about, the improvements that they could be making, the things that they could be doing, and all that. I love that as much as probably being editor of the student newspaper back in the day. But my journey really begins there, right? At Viewpoints. Just joining Journalism 1 as a summer school class at Riverside City College and diving into, ethics and what it means to write Associated Press style, and do that with, the expectation that people are reading. At that point, we were the largest publication, not the Press Enterprise, in the city of Riverside. We had a circulation of over 25,000. And so, there was a responsibility there. And I was looking for something to have responsibility over. So very quickly, I became editor-in-chief of Viewpoints. And then very quickly, I became a clerk at the Sun newspaper in San Bernardino. And back then, the Sun newspaper in San Bernardino and the Press Enterprise, they were different newspapers. They're not anymore, really, right? And there was a massive rivalry between the two. And so there was a conflict there between my hometown paper, the Press Enterprise, and the paper that I'm working for, the Sun, for me. And that kind of is the formation of my history in inland sports media. Like, I grew up in the battle between the two newspapers. I'm probably the first person to have a badge for an event that says the Press Enterprise / the Sun on it. And that was like strictly forbidden, those kinds of connections and stuff, back when we were starting out. And this is like 2000. Right. This isn't that long ago. This is 25 years ago. So it seems like it's ancient history. It's not that long ago. So, and up until 2006, 7, right, the rivalry was intense. And so on Friday nights for football scores, there was a battle to report first and be first and be right. And a lot of that has been lost. That impetus to be first and be right these days is sort of, gone by the wayside. But like, that was part of what we were doing. So strict deadlines. I grew up at the Sun in a lot of ways, from ages 20 to 26 or 27. Very much learned how to become a professional there. Rose from being a clerk to a columnist. So, it kind of all happened for me there. And a lot of, what happened for me at the Sun early on coincided with me still being editor-in-chief of Viewpoints. And so I was doing both. And I was using things I was learning at the Sun every night and kind of influencing things I was doing at Viewpoints. And so a lot of the things that you see in the 2000s era of Viewpoints and the sports stuff is still like a direct reflection of a lot of the things I was doing. I was sports first the whole time at Viewpoints. And so I very much considered the back page the front page, and tried to make the back page a sports front page. And oftentimes considered the news side secondary, but I still did a lot of really good work that I'm proud of, as editor-in-chief on the news side. And it gave me an opportunity to write about news things, because I was coming from now an aspect where I was an actual newspaper reporter with the Sun. And so it gave me an agency that I didn't have before, and kind of, I won't say threatened admin on campus, but gave them reason to take me seriously at the very least, right? So I got a lot done that I probably wouldn't have. And so again, right, initiative, right? I bet on myself, like on everything, right, to do this. And so I'm still here today doing this because of some of the decisions I made then. So yeah, you got to get started. You got to read a lot. You got to take initiative, right? You got to stand up for what you think is right, and you got to be willing to make mistakes. Made a ton of mistakes, right? I think that is an overlooked part of the process for a lot of folks, right? Because sometimes mistakes, they can end careers, but you still got to make them, right? There's still a process. You just hope to avoid the really big ones. You try not to plagiarize, right? You try not to get into spaces where you're, doing things to harm people's character and that kind of stuff. But if you're reporting on the news, typically you don't have to worry about that. It's usually in like column writing, opinion writing, where right you got to be careful. But those are some of the lessons I've learned as an editor, and a lot of that again is where I got started at RCC, right in the city of Riverside. Blessed to have grown up there and had the opportunity there. It is the best collegiate news publication in the Inland Empire. I've seen them all, right? It's better than the Highlander. It's better than the Coyote Chronicle at Cal State San Bernardino. It's better than the Daily Post at Cal Poly Pomona. CBU's newspaper doesn't meet the high journalistic standards that are met every day at RCC. So very impressed by, the program as it continues to go. I'm actually on the let me restate that, make sure I get it right. Journalism Department's advisory board. I'm also a member of that. And so as the department looks to, progress and move forward, hopefully, get to have some fun with that, maybe some influence over some decisions there. Looking forward to how, the program competes at JACC. I think, these student journalists have done really, really good work this year, with all aspects from like social media to print to, creating podcasts again this year, and doing some really fun stuff, with their social media. So I'm excited.
Right, absolutely. You kind of pointed out right there about the back page being the front page of the sports. I remember when you came into the newsroom the first time when I was there, and you mentioned that to me, and I think from every issue after that, the back page was sports page. So that was definitely something I took from you. And also you mentioned, reading a lot there. Who were some of the people that you loved to read back in the day, and even now today?
Again, sports writing has changed a lot, right? I was brought up on, the press enterprise in a lot of ways. So, Jim Alexander has been there and has been somebody I've been reading since I'm a kid. I'm really blessed and honored to call him a colleague and a friend now. Right. So yeah, a big influence on me. But I read a lot of Steinbeck, read a lot of Hemingway growing up, Jack Kerouac in college. I kind of went. Who else? A lot of the beat writers for a lot of the different sports around the country. You got to go out and find it. So having the internet helped early on with that, because it was very news based early on. So we could find, columns from, Bob Ryan on the East Coast and Tony Kornheiser when he was the actual columnist for the Washington Post. And, these people who were serious. Michael Wilbon is another one who was once a serious sports writer, who's kind of, given way to this talking show environment. But, Stephen A. Smith and Skip Bayless, right? All very, very talented sports writers who, changed their careers because of television. But that's basically like my next generation up, right? They're very much kind of like if I'm a Gen X, they're very much baby boomers, in that way. And then there's like sort of like a little bit of the younger generation, like J.A. Adonde, who's kind of like in between, who did a lot of really good work and actually worked for the Sun newspaper in San Bernardino for a time. And that brings me back to my first boss, Paul Oberjergy, who's probably the best writer you've never heard of, but the best writer out of everybody. Just eloquent and poised. Covered the Olympics, covered World Cup. Saw something in me. Really taught me a lot at the Sun. Just a great guy. And then Louis Brewster, right, another sports editor at the Sun. Miriam Swanson now covers a lot of different stuff for Orange County Register and the LA Daily News and the Southern California News Group. Really talented sports writers, really big influences on me. But yeah, I mean, like I was an English first guy in high school. And so like I've read the classics and stuff, and I say that and stuff, but like that's how I was brought in. And then reading the Press Enterprise every day. My stepdad got the Press Enterprise every morning, and so I would steal, because he wasn't interested in the sports section. I'd steal the sports section every day, and I'd take it to school sophomore, junior, senior year, basically, and I'd read that first, second period, then do whatever I was supposed to be doing, right? So I'd get caught up on box scores and fell in love with box scores and, all that way of doing newspaper stuff. So it's for readership, and, tried very hard to emulate what a pro newspaper looked like for Viewpoints. I mean, walking into Viewpoints, it was already an all-American newspaper. It already had Pacemaker Awards and all these things going on for it. And so, like there was a responsibility there to keep all that going. And I thought the best way to keep that going is make it look as professional as possible. Right. And so fortunately I had an opportunity to work at the Sun. And so I was able to meld, again, what I was learning on the pro side every night, 5-6 days a week, with the thing I was doing during the daytime, in my office in the dungeon under the AG Paul quadrangle. So
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
fun times.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish I was able to stick around longer, but definitely for the year that I was there was definitely a great time. And, it was always great to have you in the newsroom as well. Glad to hear that you're still involved in being in the newsroom, because, that's something we really need as well. But thank you again, Dennis. Really appreciate you coming on today. And yeah, just thank you so much to my guest.
Good to chat. Good to hang out, man. Anytime.
Yep, appreciate it. Thank you once again to my guest, SoCal News Group sports reporter based in Riverside, Dennis Pope. Make sure you follow Dennis on Instagram at Dennis Anthony Pope, and make sure you follow me on Instagram at the Eric Pacheco, and on Twitter at Eric Pacheco ASU, to stay up to date with all things ASU athletics, as I'm currently finishing out the season covering ASU football. And make sure you subscribe for more podcasts of Rooted in the Riv here on YouTube. Thank you to everyone for listening. Have a great day. Have a great Thanksgiving. God bless.